A very warm welcome to this session on Agile Auditing, Mindset and Methodologies. I'm your host, Pallavi Singh, and with me, the presenter is Raven Catlin. Ms. Catlin is an internationally recognized expert and speaker in internal auditing, leveraging her 15 years of auditing, consulting, and training experience. Seminar attendees gain a lot of valuable skills and motivation to achieve success. Ms. Catlin is VCU graduate, and before starting Raven Global Training, she was a consultant at Experis and senior manager for a leading consultancy company. She held internal audit positions with Freddie Mac, Bank of America, and Philip Morris. Ms. Catlin is an active member of the IAA and is also a continuing author to IAA CIA Learning Center. A very warm welcome to you, Raven, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. I appreciate the introduction. It is my experience in internal audit that really led to creating the Agile Auditing methodology. In today's session, we're going to talk about some lessons learned as well as the mindset and methodologies that you have available to you to implement in your own internal auditing department. It is my hope that every single internal audit activity will have Agile Auditing as a tool and resource that they can use in order to get through their audit projects and accomplish their goals and objectives. I'd like to offer you to continue this conversation by getting social. Feel free to use the hashtags Agile Audit, Internal Audit, GRC Summit, with or without tags to Metric Stream or myself. I'm always out there looking for hashtags related to Agile Audit because it helps me learn more what other people are doing. I'm not going to go into detail on myself. I will elaborate a little bit more on how Agile Auditing came to be. Back in 2011, I was sharing with a friend of mine some frustrations about the audit process. Delays in receiving evidence, delays in getting work papers timely reviewed, and generally missing a lot of our deadlines. It was then that she introduced me to the Agile Auditing methodology. So I should say thank you, Ceciliana. I had an opportunity to read the methodology and kind of retrofit what internal audit does into the Agile Audit methodology. This session will explore some of the other methodologies that are out there. Of course, I'll also share with you the methodology that I've been working with. More information on that will be published in an October 2020, hopefully, fingers crossed, book on Agile Auditing. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to share with you some contact information and to say that you're welcome to connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. You can also email us or visit our website. As Agile Auditing has grown in popularity, it is my extreme pleasure to recognize that many internal audit shops are leveraging Agile Auditing as one of the tools in their tool belt. It doesn't have to be the methodology that we set out, and again, there are other methodologies out there. We've worked with about a dozen other entities in internal audit shops in order to either establish or revamp their Agile Auditing methodology. It's through that experience that we've actually been able to even evaluate and revamp our own methodology and realize that there are a couple of challenges that some organizations will have. The first is many organizations focus way too much on the methodology, the processes, and the technology. And that should be your first takeaway on this session, is Agile is not about the processes and technology. It is more about getting to a common goal, reaching that common goal together. It's not about just getting there at the end. I often say that people are on their Agile audit journey because it is a journey. And it's through this journey that many internal audit activities as well as audit stakeholders will realize the benefits that can be obtained through using Agile Auditing. I also want to take a moment to give some call out to culture, because many organizations are used to using internal audit in a very specific way. And they're used to internal auditing having a very specific process. In this environment, it will require some cultural shift and culture change to adapt to the Agile Auditing methodology. Some entities, such as Citi, have had opportunities to establish Agile at the corporate level, which makes it a lot easier for internal audit to adopt Agile auditing methodologies. But if you're not there and your company has not implemented Agile auditing, just know that you have a ladder that you need to climb to help include the organization and to shift the culture to accept the Agile auditing approach. As I stated, Agile auditing came to me because of my wonderful friend Ceciliana, and it was really contrasting with the traditional waterfall process that many of internal audit activities are performing, where you start with your annual audit planning to create an annual audit plan, and then you go to each engagement where each engagement has planning, performing, reporting. And the duration that many internal audit shops see as they're doing these types of audits is roughly about 3 months. I've certainly had some audit clients who went 6 months. I even had one audit client who admittedly planned for 360 days and would even miss those deadlines. And looking at that process, I personally believe the reason why we do that is because we start by having a fixed constraint of the scope. And we have an idea or an estimate of how long it will take, but the reality is it always takes longer. And for those of you that are actually able to get your waterfall audits done in time, congratulations. I think of this very much like a dessert that I once had, is that when you have all of these options available and you have all these risks available to you, it's almost like you want to do it all since you're there. Or as I'll call it, it's like putting everything into the kitchen sink. At the Yacht and Beach Club in Orlando, Florida, it's a Disney property, they actually serve a dessert called the kitchen sink. And this kitchen sink has 9 different flavors of ice cream, nearly 30 toppings. It's literally like, because it was available to them, they put it in the dessert. And if that's not enough, they then squirt an entire can of whipped cream on top of the dessert. For me personally, as I was trying to enjoy this, which we weren't able to finish in 30 minutes, all I did was spend time moving the other toppings out the way to get to my preferred flavor of ice cream. Well, in Agile auditing, we have an opportunity to stop kitchen sink type auditing. What we're going to do in Agile, instead of following that traditional waterfall approach where we say, here's everything we want to have in scope, and then it all works out in the wash later, causing us to underestimate the amount of time it actually takes. In Agile auditing, we're going to actually start by fixing the constraint of the schedule. We're going to limit ourselves to doing maybe a 2-week audit. That's my recommendation. And then we're going to figure out how much we can fit into that 2-week time frame. Anything that can't fit doesn't get included until a future Agile project. So I do want to give some consideration, as many of us are dealing with various virtual environments in light of current activities and COVID-19, about how Agile auditing might be affected in a virtual world. One of the principles of Agile auditing that we've found to be foundational to its success is co-location with the audit clients as well as the audit team members. Well, that's almost impossible. So we have to get comfortable at working with virtual teams. So I wanted to give a few ideas of things that you need to do if you're doing an Agile project in a virtual way. And the first is you do need to set and communicate work schedules. You have to know when your team members are available and when they're not. And even flexible work schedules, as many people are possibly working from home and they have other priorities and things that come up, we have to respect that people are not necessarily going to work the 9 to 5. So set and communicate those work schedules. It's also really important to hold regular virtual meetings. And you might think it's a little overboard, but one of the elements of Agile is to do something called a daily stand-up. Don't skip the daily stand-ups. I know how easy it is to do, especially in a virtual environment, to say, oh, I'll just watch the replay. Well, there shouldn't be a replay, and there shouldn't be a report out on what was discussed in the daily stand-ups. This virtual meeting is critical to the success of an Agile project. And because we are working with people virtually, and one of the best techniques that auditors can use to get information is to get people to like us, try to use video technology whenever you can. Seeing someone's face really does help make a connection, and it helps people build relationships. And since I'm on the topic of building relationships, remember to check in with your team members, including your audit client, personally, before you get into the meat of all the work that needs to be done. And it could be a simple, how are you? I was thinking about you. Hey, I just saw a bird out the window and, made me think of you, or whatever the case it is. But check in with them personally to build those relationships so it does feel like a team atmosphere. Something else that we need to work on as we're working in these virtual environments is applying one of the foundational elements of Agile auditing and internal audit. And that is making sure that you are still applying a risk-based approach to your Agile projects. This includes taking some time in the beginning of your audit to figure out what it is that you need to know, learn, and understand, as well as taking the opportunity to identify those business objectives as well as risks. We are going to continue to use risk-based auditing in identifying and evaluating those risks, and more importantly, assessing the risk. And this is directly related to setting the scope of an Agile audit project. Remember, your time frame is 2 weeks. You have to figure out what you can actually accomplish in 2 weeks. And Agile auditing is focused on getting to the biggest risks first. Let's make sure that we get those big risks covered by basing them on an evaluation of possibly the impact and likelihood of those risks. And then be very conscious and very careful about putting things in scope and sticking to it. In many internal audit shops that I've worked in, it's almost inevitable that the auditor will encounter scope creep by wanting to look at a few more transactions, or the audit leadership will say, hey, you should also look at this, or even the audit client might say, hey, while you're here, would you mind reviewing this? You have 2 weeks. You can't do it all. Keep a backlog so you can track those requests and those other items later. In case you do have time, you can come back to them. I'll talk a little bit more about scope in just a few moments. We can also help accomplish our Agile audit projects by using the risk-based methodology when we're doing our evaluation of the adequacy of control design. One of the things that I do, and I call this actually extreme risk-based auditing because this isn't for every internal audit shop, is I try to be very diligent. If a control is not adequate enough, I don't test it. I would go ahead and communicate back to management that there is an opportunity for a risk to occur, and then move on to the next thing. We do have to evaluate both the adequacy of design and the effectiveness of the controls. In working in a virtual environment and applying Agile auditing, we have an opportunity to reduce the amount of substantive testing that we're doing, at least the manual substantive testing, and to leverage on data analytics. So another element of working in a virtual environment, and many internal audit shops are actually experiencing this today, is that we're having to explore things that we've thought about doing in the past and just didn't get the ball rolling on, including things like data analytics. It is my advice to you to first figure out what information, what questions you want to ask, and then how you might start presenting that information. You can use a variety of charts and graphs, and when it comes to the questions, make sure you're using a combination of both exploratory questions, questions that you're not looking for a specific answer, and confirmatory questions, questions where we're looking for an either or, a yes or no, or something such as are approvals in place or not. The fourth thing I want you to consider as you're working in your virtual environment and applying Agile auditing is take advantage of audit work papers. We can't expect perfection in this world. We have to realize that there are and should be a minimum or base set of expectations on your work papers. I often like to say a C passes, right? If you get a C in grade school or college on an A, B, C, D, F score, C passes the grade. Maybe that's all we need. Many internal audit shops, however, don't even realize that they're striving for A or even A+ work papers. In an Agile environment, we're just trying to document the information that we have obtained to reach our conclusion. It doesn't need to be perfect. We should also be willing to share files freely across the team members. The team members should also include your audit client. In addition, we want to make sure that those work papers have some sort of workflow status. So that way others can see that if it's still in draft, so they know maybe not to give you review notes too soon. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the Agile audit methodologies that you have available to you. In the methodology that I've worked with and I've created, I've tried to stick very, very closely to the original Agile manifesto. I do focus more on individuals and the interactions. That's why I'm encouraging you to have those daily meetings and not to have physical report outs or replays of those meetings. I want people to actually attend. Also, working software has to be adjusted just a little bit. We have to think about our purpose as internal audit, and we're not creating software. We're creating information and providing assurance on whether or not risks are managed and controls are working. That's what we're trying to get to. We want to give people management, that insight as to whether or not their risks are being properly managed and their controls are working as intended, so they can know what they need to do in the future to better manage risks and meet their objectives. I also focus a lot on customer collaboration. Again, this goes back to the foundations of what really started Agile auditing, one of them anyway, which was inability to obtain audit evidence from audit clients quickly or when needed. I've found that by building relationships and collaborating with customers, it enables you to get that information, review that information, clarify any possible discrepancies, and move on with the next work. I also want to add that collaboration is one of the soft skills that's actually tested and listed on the CIA exam syllabus. So it goes right in line with what internal audit's trying to do. And then finally, responding to change. Yes, I know, I said set your scope, stick to it. We can change it, but we should not be adding a lot to our scope. Remember, if you're adding something to scope, it's going to increase your time frame. If you do add, you have to figure out what you're going to take away. So we do want to respond to change instead of following a plan like an annual audit plan, to be responsive to the ongoing changes in the business processes and risks that our companies are facing. So I want to give some credit to Brandon Jones because I found this image and it directly correlates to what I've put out there for an Agile auditing methodology. And I want to start by recognizing the team. Your Agile team must include not only your auditors and your audit leadership, but also you need to include your client, at least in your mindset, that they are part of your team. Don't leave them out. Don't do things without them. Don't exclude them from activities. In fact, feel free to share your work papers with them as well. One of the things that we do in our Agile auditing environment is I actually do a peer review of internal audit work papers with the audit client. It's all about increasing transparency, which has another benefit that I'll talk about later. The product owner in an Agile auditing environment must be the chief audit executive. I toyed around with this in the beginning, but I've since decided that it has to be the chief audit executive because they are ultimately the ones who are going to set priorities as well as determine whether or not the Agile audit is actually complete and delivering the value that it needs to deliver. We also use the product backlog in Agile auditing. In this case, we're going to refer to the product backlog instead of your audit universe as your risk universe. Remember, one of the benefits of Agile is being adaptive, being able to respond to change. Risks are constantly changing. So having a risk universe and letting auditors audit one risk or maybe a couple of related risks in one Agile project is a very good benefit as well as service to the organizations. In Agile auditing and Agile methodology, there's often a large planning session that includes all of your team members. We're going to do the same thing. It's called a sprint planning meeting. In this sprint planning meeting, this is where, in part, you're going to be brainstorming. The chief audit executive, as the product owner, is going to be sharing information that they have. The audit team members, including the auditors and the audit clients, will be able to ask questions to gain clarification. And it's the intent at the end of this sprint planning meeting that you would have a defined and agreed upon scope. You would know what's in and what's out and what's going to happen in a future Agile project later on. All of this goes into creating your sprint backlog. Your sprint backlog, by any other name, will be your audit program. Your audit program is still going to comply with the IA standards and expectations of having an audit objective, audit scope, as well as having the tasks that you're going to complete and the resources identified that you need to complete those tasks. In an agile environment, it's recommended that your team be somewhere between 3 and 7 members. Yes, I've seen agile teams of 2 work very well. You're really never a team of 1 if you remember that your audit client is part of your team. It is the assignment of those resources and an understanding of who's doing what that allows the agile project to not only remain in scope, but also get completed in a specific time frame. In agile methodology, it's recommended to have a sprint, a short burst of energy, for approximately 1 to 4 weeks. In some experimentation, I've actually found that sticking to a consistent time frame is very beneficial to the audit team, and it allows for easy transitions from one agile project to another. I actually would like to see agile projects be around 2 weeks, and again, it should be a consistent 2-week time frame, maybe beginning on a Monday and ending 2 Fridays later. Remember that during this 2-week sprint, there are going to be some activities that you would have, including having that daily stand-up or daily scrum meeting every 24 hours. Determine when that meeting is going to happen when you first start your project and stick to the schedule. I cannot overemphasize, please do not create a report or show a playback of what was discussed in that daily sprint or daily stand-up meeting. At the conclusion of your sprints, at the end of the 2 weeks, you would have a sprint review. This sprint review would involve the audit team members, the audit client, as well as your leadership team to make sure everybody's on the same page and understands the results. Unfortunately, in Agile, I still haven't figured out how to deliver a work product without creating an audit report. So yes, I still create an audit report, and then I move to a sprint retrospective. And the sprint retrospective is essentially a lessons learned that hopefully you're already doing in your traditional audit methodology. It's giving you and the team an opportunity to think about what went well and what can we do better next time. So as I said, there are many different methodologies out there, and you don't necessarily have to adhere to this particular methodology. Let's go ahead and look at some of the other frameworks and methodologies that have been used. You'll notice some subtle differences between each of these, and I'm just trying to give you some options because it's not a one-size-fits-all methodology. It is okay to tweak it and make it work for you and your organizations. So I'm going to start with looking at one of our first methodologies, and I really just want to highlight some of the changes as well as some of the similarities between this methodology and others. One of the first changes that you'll see is there's actually a couple of different, we'll call what were sprint planning meetings. These are now going to be a pre-scope meeting. And this is limited to the audit team. This is where the audit team just kind of sits down together and talks about what do we actually want to deliver? What is the risk or what is the audit project that we're trying to deliver? Now, what's interesting in this particular methodology is that they had a series of sprints, which is very close to a methodology that a leading big firm created, which they actually have, in addition to the pre-scope meeting, they will have what's called a discovery sprint. Now, Agile does require you to have knowledge. So the discovery sprint was their approach to making sure the auditors have the baseline knowledge of that area. And once they get that baseline knowledge, then they have another scope meeting to clarify and refine the scope later. One thing that I really appreciated in this methodology, and one thing that I have actually included in our own, is in that sprint planning meeting, I also asked the team to define what is our definition of ready. And the definition of ready is essentially, when do we know that we're ready to actually begin execution, to begin our field work? During execution, this is your sprint, and there are a number of activities that are going to happen, including the daily stand-up, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective, the backlog review, and then this particular organization had a senior leadership closeout, which is with the audit team only, and then a stakeholder closeout. In ours, that is our the sprint review that would include both the internal audit leadership as well as the audit client. Another step that they added to their process, which I find very helpful, is having a definition of done. And the definition of done lets you know when do we think we have actually completed this project? When do we think that we're ready to deliver those final results? I also established what is our definition of done in that first sprint planning meeting. A technique that I've used in the past outside of Agile auditing is to actually sit down and have a report drafting session. This particular internal audit shop did actually have a report drafting session where they would sit down with the owners, with the product owners, the senior chief audit executive, as well as with the delivery team, the auditors, and the audit client team, and they would actually this particular organization did not include the audit client. They would write the report draft. A lot of times, one of the reasons that our audit projects miss the deadline is because that reporting process tends to churn around over and over and over again and takes far too long. This really streamlines that process because now everybody is able to see it, possibly up on a presentation board, and they're able to contribute their thoughts without having to go through a lot of back and forth later. This reporting session, I would personally include my audit clients. That's what I did when I was at Bank of America. We actually had to sit down to kind of go through the language and the preferences and style preferences that many of the readers, as well as the people who were receiving the report, would prefer. Another interesting thing about this particular audit shop that I've also incorporated in my Agile auditing methodology is having a project discussion document, or in other words, kind of having kind of the foundation and layout about what the project's about, what the business area is about. In some Agile disciplines that I've read, this is part of the regular tool package, and it's something that I do like, particularly in a virtual environment. Having a go-to document that lets everyone know what they should expect, I think, is a really great tool that people can refer to and reference. And it's a great brainstorming tool to go through when you're having that first sprint planning meeting. Another version of Agile auditing, it kind of follows the same structure with planning, audit execution, and reporting, is actually first starting with that planning session where all team members are involved, where you have the stakeholders and the partners talking about their risks and what's important. And then we can go forward and look at the audit execution process to make sure that we are going through the sprint planning meeting, the daily stand-up meetings, as well as maintaining the product backlog as well as the sprint backlog. Another interesting element about this framework is they actually had multiple test sprints. So each sprint would be a 2-week period, but because there might be a lot of stuff they wanted to cover, they would break those sprints down to be very specific and focused, and they might have multiple team members working on different sprints at the same time. And then they also had a reporting sprint. Now, reporting is actually for them part of execution, because the reality is the audit isn't done until the report's been written. The reporting aspect would include that review as well as the retrospective. So again, there were 3 different methodologies and frameworks that you could leverage and pull from. You might do a mashup. That might be the best solution for you. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk a little bit about some of the tips and the techniques that you probably want to consider as you're rolling out your Agile auditing methodology. Some of these are going to be mindset related, or at least helping people develop the right mindset. The first one is you have to socialize. I actually had this as a lessons learned from my very first implementation with a leading athletic manufacturer. We went in and just rolled out Agile auditing and didn't really, well, first, it wasn't in the company. Agile was not a corporate mentality, and it failed. I honestly tell you, it failed miserably, so much that they abandoned all hopes of ever doing Agile auditing. And I realized that you have to socialize it. Agile and agile lingo and language has to become part of the culture and part of your organizational environment. Number 2 is you have to maintain focus on that scope. Scope is such a critical element, and we cannot have scope additions and scope creep and still expect to get our agile projects done in a defined fixed constraint window of 2 weeks. Number 3 is you must increase communication. Remember, in a virtual environment, this will mean having more virtual meetings. It might mean making use of technology where you can actually ping someone or instant messenger them, since you can't actually sit there with them face to face. Number 4 is the audit team must participate. A project will go nowhere and will never get completed unless people are actually participating in the project, attending those meetings, responding to messages, looking at documents and evidence together. My 5th tip is having those daily stand-up meetings. The daily stand-ups should be in a public space where others can observe, but the only people who are really contributing to that meeting are going to be the team members, your audit team, as well as your audit client. It's often held around the project task board, so you can easily track and move items from not started or to do through in process or doing, finally to done. And it's this project task board that's one of my favorite tools in Agile auditing. And I've even seen internal audit shops who are not using Agile actually use the project task board. It's a great visual way to see how much we've completed and how much we have left to do. Tip number 6, and I want to first give some credit to those of you who've developed and mastered your soft skills and your emotional intelligence. Being audited doesn't feel good, right? We have to have empathy, and we also have to have an understanding, especially in today's environment, that people have other priorities. As I said, one of the added benefits that you get through Agile auditing is increasing the transparency of what happens behind the closed doors of audit. By increasing that transparency and using Agile auditing, hopefully we'll get to a culture and a mindset where people don't fear the audit. We're not here just to write people up and tell them what they're doing wrong. We're here to help them improve their process and add value to the organization to make sure they can accomplish their goals and objectives. If we keep that mindset in play as we're establishing the Agile team as well as going through the Agile project, hopefully people will start to realize that internal audit is not here to beat you up over the head. Tip number 7, we need to modify this a little bit for today's virtual environment, is it really helps to have collaborative workspaces. One of my clients actually, it's not even called hoteling. People do not have desks. They actually have lockers. And every day you can first come, first serve, create a workspace. And for the teams that are actually doing Agile, they sit in an environment that looks very much like this. They'll pull a table together, hopefully in the client's workspace to reduce the interference with the client's day-to-day. But in this virtual environment, this might mean having an open virtual office line. Use something like Zoom where everybody's logged in and we can talk to one another freely in order to move through the audit project. This next tip, number 8, is actually a lessons learned. And it's been a hard lesson, and it's actually been a really hard to implement solution, which is in Agile, it's really helpful to have dedicated resources. These dedicated resources will help make sure the audit project is moving forward, because instead of in our normal environment for audits, we realize that we have a delay in one area, so we go work on another project. Well, that actually causes more delays. So having a dedicated resource, particularly on the audit side, would be very helpful. Another lesson learned related to the dedicated resource is if your audit client is also doing an Agile project, that's a lot harder because now they're solely dedicated to their project, and internal audit is a second, third, fourth, or last priority for them. I hope you found some of the mindset, including the things such as helping people remember it's about accomplishing a common goal, and the methodology that includes having your audit team members include your audit clients, as well as the various options for the methodologies has been helpful for you. In addition, I hope that you take advantage of some of these techniques and some of my own personal lessons learned as you start implementing your Agile project and begin your Agile audit journey. I want to thank you for attending this session, and I truly appreciate your interest in Agile auditing. Continue this conversation. Again, feel free to use hashtags Agile Audit, Internal Audit, and GRC Summit as you're sharing your thoughts and ideas and even your woes, challenges, and success stories on the social media markets. I invite you to connect with me personally, and I look forward to sharing this conversation and future information about Agile auditing and other topics with you in possibly future conferences. I also want to thank MetricStream for allowing me to share my thoughts and insights on Agile auditing. You guys are a great partner, and I appreciate the time and the information that you're allowing me to share. I hope you all have a wonderful session and enjoy the GRC Summit.